The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome to The Next Element. I'm your host, Deb Valentine. In books and in movies, we hear and we read about sacred tools used in ceremony. We often see pictures of people holding wands or what look like knives. We see images on altars, or people worship in many different faiths. Jewelry can also play a part, in particular certain crystals or stones. These are referred to as ritual tools. I have Ryan Leese here from QD Scrapworks with me. Ryan crafts many of the tools as well as runes. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, thank you.
So, Ryan, we're going to start off really easily. I kind of answered the question a little bit, but I'm going to let you elaborate. So what are ritual tools?
It's just that simple. Any tool used for any ritual would be a ritual tool, right? So, and a ritual can be as mundane as you want it to be or as complex and involved, right? So something like a deck of tarot cards is one of the more common ritual tools that you see used nowadays, right? It's something that people are using for part of the ritual, right? But yeah, like you said, wands and epheme, the ritual knives, that's a little more where I work. Those are made out of copper and steel, and that's my kind of medium. And those are used, primarily it's supposed to be kind of a focus and an extension, right? Like there's a lot of different practices, and then there's a lot of different practitioners within all those practices. So everybody's got their own unique spin on things, but it seems to me that it's often kind of an extension and a focus, somewhere to kind of put your thought and your energy to then do whatever it is you're doing for your ritual.
Okay, so it helps. So the ritual tools then would help to manipulate the energy to whatever it is that you're trying to manifest in the ritual. And
within whatever your scope of belief is, right? Whatever that manipulation and as far as you see it, and even if it's all placebo, I mean, the fact that we can still kind of control our thoughts and emotions and stuff is pretty awesome. So it's all kind of within how you take it. And I try not to prescribe too much to any one school. I want to learn as much as I can from everywhere. And I've had the honor of making ritual tools for any religion that I've come into contact with. I've made crosses outside of Christian churches, and I've made pagan ritual tools that are, in people's little private collections. So that's what's fun for me.
Okay, so your experience kind of spans the universe then, doesn't it?
I'm trying. I'm working at it.
Okay, so what material goes into crafting some of these items, and can you tell us what kinds of items that you were mentioning that you've done crosses for the Christian faith? What kinds of things would you do for some of the pagan faiths, let's say?
99.9% of what I do is steel, because I'm a blacksmith by trade. That's where I started. That's where I got all my training from. And that's honestly, it's what I'm most comfortable with. I've been playing with copper a lot the last few years because it's similar to steel, but different. But I like it. It's got a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of neat stuff going on in copper. There's mass there, but it's squishy and it's super conductive. So it's fun to push around. And the pagan community really likes combining copper around steel, or copper around iron specifically. There's something about that a lot of different beliefs find significant or as kind of like an enhancement. So I combine a lot of copper and steel sort of stuff. So like I can show you, this is just a basic piece of steel, right? So this is just your bar stock. And one of the first things that I learned as a blacksmith was the most important job of the blacksmith is to leave no evidence of the parent stock behind. Right. So if this is what I start with, none of my finished product should look like this. So then this is the kind of thing that you'd make out of that. Right. So there's a lot of mass manipulation going on. And as much as this isn't made out of a high carbon tool steel and it hasn't been tempered and blah, blah, blah to make it all super razor sharp for cutting, this isn't used for cutting. The ritual tools are very, very rarely, need to be sharp and are very, very rarely used to cut anything. And if it is, it's usually like paper or cloth. So these These are just mild, and then they're left blunt so that they're not accidentally going to hurt anyone, because some of them are left out as altarpieces or they're put on display and stuff like that, right? But yeah, so this is the kind of mass manipulation you can get, you know, very simply, and it adds a lot of energy to the piece, right? Every time you're slamming it, it's more and more kinetic energy going into it, and you're pushing the mass around and you're moving it, and you can really feel it kind of growing and watch it happen. And I think that's what people like about them, right? That's what people like about iron and steel. When you see it, it's always heavy. You know what I mean? Especially once you get the hammer texture in it, when it's really hand forged stuff, it always looks so imposing and heavy, but there's something very, I don't know, inviting and natural about it at the same time.
Okay. And when you're crafting these tools, is there like a general rule of design for, let's say, Ames, or are they custom made? Or is it, or do most of your clients just kind of leave it to your discretion?
More of that's happening, and I really like that, where people are just like, "Hey, I like your work. Can you do a whatever and whatever?" Right? So I just got an order for. They wanted a blacksmith style knife is where the handle is drawn way the heck out and then wrapped back in on itself like this. So they said, "I really like your blacksmith style FMA. And I want a tiger's eye in it, a raw tiger's eye." So, and this is what I came up with. We picked out some tiger's eye. We sent her some pictures, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And this is that I did it. And it's that simple, right? Sometimes though, there are very specific rules. Sometimes there's rules about the process that you have to go through for making things. And then sometimes there's rules about the times for that too. I think a lot of people see that as like superstition and stuff, right? It's easy to look from the outside, and especially I think, you know, people who are raised very differently where they see it and they're like, oh, that's some weird culty ritual, right? But going way back into the Middle Ages, we've got all these legends of blacksmiths who had these like weird rhymes and these jingles, and they'd only work like right as the sun went down. And it seemed like these weird kind of things, but really, when the sun is going down, it's much easier to see your temper colors. So that's the time to get your best blade tempers in, right? It's nothing magic and crazy. It's just that's what seems to work best, right? And a lot of there's different ways of reciting the Lord's Prayer, and there's other incantations and stuff that are to help you figure out your timing for how long something has been in the forge or in a furnace for, right? So there's a lot of stuff that maybe didn't start as like ritual, but then it kind of evolved into more ritual. And now the fact that we can keep a lot of that around makes it more ritual. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
So tell me, Ryan, you're talking about, traditionally and going back. So do you have your own ritual when you're blacksmithing? You don't have to tell us what it is, but yeah,
I'm not even sure. I get asked that a lot. People ask me a lot about rituals, and usually I say, well, I brush my teeth, right? Like that's a ritual that we all share. So, but I don't know. There's nothing. I don't take it super seriously anymore. I used to. I don't refer to myself as a professional blacksmith anymore, but I won't refer to myself as an artist either. I'm kind of in this weird in between space where I can get away with doing whatever I want. No one really questions it, but at the same time, nobody's really sure what it is I do, right? So it's an awkward spot to be in, but at the same time, it allows me a lot of freedom to play and explore and create. But then I don't know that there's any structure to how I go about it. Typically, I light the forge, and when it's hot and ready to go, I go. Okay. Well, I guess one thing that I do often is I'll make leaves when I start up, because we do like primarily we're through the summers, we're going to different medieval festivals and Renaissance fairs and stuff and setting up the forge and being the blacksmith for the show, right? So I sell stuff off my little table at that. So I spend like the winter months building a whole bunch of tiny little pendants and stock stuff to fill that table. So, you know, often when I light the forge, I'll make at least 2 leaves to start. And that's to fill the table. But I guess anyone watching that would assign that as like, oh, that's how he starts. That's how the blacksmith starts the day, is by forging 2 leaves, right? It's the same as, you know, watching someone recite the Lord's Prayer in a weird way while he forges something. You know, it becomes something weird. But yeah, I guess that's my ritual.
That's your ritual. Okay. So you mentioned copper, you mentioned steel. Are there any other types of materials that you work with and craft things with?
Bronze is a lot of fun, actually. This is a piece that I'm working on. So I teach
a chest plate.
Yeah, it's a big Greek breastplate because I teach history of arms and armor to like grade 4 to high school. I used to do it in schools, and then COVID happened, and now I do it like this. So I needed some more pieces. I've been trying to build, from the Stone Age through. I want everything kind of repped really well, and a bronze breastplate was one thing that I did not have. So I went back to the blacksmith shop that I started at. He is a fantastic sculptor and armorer. So I went there and I was like, hey, look, this is what I need and this is what I got to make. So I spent a day there and he helped me kind of do this. It was fun too, because he's like, you don't need my help. You used to make muscular breastplates with me like all the time. It was like a large portion of what we did because we were just good at it, right? And I said, yeah, but I need you to put the Sharpie marks on the inside so I know where everything is. And he's like, well, just you think about it and think about where those Sharpie marks would be. And I went at it. And sure enough, I'd go and show him like every 15 minutes. I was probably super annoying. So I'd run over and be like, is this good? Is this good? And he's like, yeah, no, you're doing it. You know what you're doing. Just do it. So I started treating more of my business like that, where it's like, well, I've been at it long enough and I'm comfortable enough with it that even if I don't 100% know what I'm doing, I'm just going to have at it.
So it comes to you intuitively then?
I hope so. Or I just keep trying until it does.
Okay. So the one thing that we talked about, or that you were talking about, was the fact that the energy that goes into making these different pieces. And I know that a lot of people, when they do get new ritual tools, they'll sort of clear and charge them.
Yep.
Do you advise your clients to do that? Do you do that yourself when you're working with different types of materials? Before you actually start the material, like the forging process?
It's complicated because part of the act of forging in a coal forge, because I use a coal forge as opposed to a propane forge. A lot of people use propane these days, or the induction ones where it's just like electricity. You hold it in a thing and it just gets hot. I'd like to try that, but I use a coal forge, and part of using a coal forge is babying basically how the coal burns and making sure that the impurities are burning off on the outside. You're getting the right amount of coke buildup, and then your ash is burning away in the bottom. So you're not getting sulfur and other impurities into your steel, right? So I'm concentrating on that kind of the whole time. And then I'm forging the piece. Once it's done, I sand the crap out of everything, like just with hand sandpaper, because like some of the tools have sharp edges and stuff. Like you never know, like especially with something like, so these are tongs. So if a piece is too hot, I'll hold it in here, right? But sometimes the edges will leave little sharp burrs on stuff, and I don't want anything that's going to snag anywhere, right? So I file and I sand and I sand and I sand, and then I coat everything in, if it's steel, I coat it in wax. So that's my cleaning. I get that done. And then it is physically clean and ready for you. And then beyond that, it's whatever people want. And again,
okay, Ryan, I'm just going to interrupt you just for a moment. We have to go to break.
Okay.
So stay tuned. And after break, we're going to continue the conversation with Ryan Lease from QD Scrapworks. Thanks very much.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
The unsolved ones, we have to stand up
and approach these cases in a way outside the box.
Let the world know, those out there that did commit a murder, there are people that are coming after you.
There's just a lot of good people trying to do the right thing.
Because it's something that you have to be passionate about.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome back to The Next Element. I'm your host, Deb Valentine, and we're here with Ryan Lease from QD Scrapworks, and we're talking about ritual tools. Welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you.
Brian, we were talking about the actual crafting of the pieces, and you were talking about a coal forge. So why have you chosen the coal forge versus some of the other options that would be available to you?
It's so dirty and primal. It's just where it's at. It's what I learned on. And then when I left, I needed my own. And I've never even considered anything else. I've worked on propane forges before, and it belches fire. It just belches fire all over the place. And for what I do traveling to festivals, I have to fit in as some medieval peasant or a Viking or, some steampunk thing. And a propane forge doesn't really fit in at that sort of thing. But the coal looks and smells the part, right? So I just like it. I get more control and more manipulation, I find, with it like that. It's more to work with, but it's more rewarding.
It's more rewarding. Okay, so Ryan, tell me, how did you get into this? How did you get into blacksmithing?
I don't know. There was no real excuse for it at all. I figured Mom probably said I should be a lawyer or something, and then I Googled blacksmithing just on a whim. I wasn't like one of those kids that was super, super into medieval stuff or but I Googled blacksmithing. I found a local shop and I took like a weekend workshop, and immediately at the end of the workshop, I Googled when is his next workshop. And I took every single course that shop offered until there weren't anymore. And then I just kept hanging around. So eventually I'd get paid for like sweeping the floor and cleaning the toilet and stuff like that. And then slowly that got upgraded and I got forge time. And then I worked there for like a decade. So yeah, baby steps, not a traditional apprenticeship or anything like that, but it worked.
Okay. And what are your favorite things to craft?
Ritual tools, LARP tools, stuff like the live action role players. They always need like lock picks and stuff like that. Anything that means something to the person. I used to make a lot of residential ironwork and like bragging rights pieces, wall hangers, like stuff that was only ever made to hang on a wall or like replicas of whatever, right? And there was no real, I don't know, creativity or exploration to that. You were just cookie cutters, doing the same thing. So when someone's like, I need something that means something to me and I want you to make it, like that's really cool. And then they have a piece and they use it, like that Atheme. That lady requested that Atheme, and all she said is, I want a blacksmith style Atheme like you do with a tiger's eye, go, right? And now she's going to use that. Right? Like that's cool. That's what I like making.
Okay. So, I mean, we were talking about ritual tools. So I know one of the ritual tools that you do craft a lot, some of are runes.
Yep.
And yeah. So what are runes? So just, if you can remind us what runes are and what they're used for.
Primarily they're an alphabet. They were first and foremost the first written Germanic alphabet. And they were seen as, you can see them as kind of being plagiarized from early Roman and Greek and some other local languages and Etruscan. But I think what it was the Germanic people trying desperately to make their voice heard, right? They were constantly being trampled by Rome, and that language made Rome powerful, right? So the Germanics, once they had developed their own, trade increased, exploration increased, tribes could band together, right? Even if people were using the runes a little bit different and the sound values could change, it still allowed them to communicate and trade, which, is a huge game changer.
So the Germanic alphabet for the runes is the most popular one.
I find the Elder Futhark is the most popular, and that was the first written Germanic language. And then there's the Younger Futhark is also fairly popular. I think because it's easier, it's less runes, and it's more associated with the Scandinavians, like the Vikings. So they're referred to as the Viking runes a lot. And the Saxon Futhark is pretty popular too. But there's tons. There's a lot. And real and not real. Like there's tons from video games and stuff that are really cool to play with too.
Okay. And do you do a lot of crafting for video games, like for live role play and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for the live action role players, I get to do some of their props occasionally. Like their weapons have to be made out of foam and whatever else they are, because like they're really smashing on each other, right? A lot of their armor is made out of lighter weight stuff, and my stuff is a little bit priced out of what they typically like to spend. But what I get them with is the little tools, right? They're like, well, we need lock picks. So then I get to forge what I would, pretend is like a lock pick set for a medieval style lock, because they have to role play locking or pick locking, right? Or like traps and stuff, right? Like a piece of steel that can sit on the floor that if someone touches it, it'll make noise, but it's not going to trip anyone. Or handcuffs. LARP handcuffs was a big one too, where it's 2 steel rods that you hold with a chain connecting them so that you can pretend that you're handcuffed. But if you're running through a forest at 3 o'clock in the morning, because these people are so hardcore that happens, you don't want to like trip and be in actual manacles and fall and break both your arms and your neck, right? You can just drop these and then brace your fall. So, and that kind of stuff is fun for me, because there's like really, really simple engineering going on there, but it's for something that's super, super, super useful for these people, right? So that's exactly what I like to make.
So what is you were saying that you take part in a lot of festivals and medieval Renaissance fairs and that through the summer. So tell me, what is one of the most interesting sort of events that you've attended that sort of sticks out in your mind?
That's difficult. I like, so the Robin and the Hood Festival is a local one that I've done, and it was my first festival. It was the one that my old boss had introduced me to, and he did it kind of out of the goodness of his heart. He never really wanted to, so he passed it over to me. And the second he did that, I was like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I've been trying that. So so Robin Hood has a really, really, nice soft spot in my heart. That's in Elmira. But there's also like Pirate Fest outside of Guelph. That one gets wild. Coldwater was a steampunk festival that was up north in Coldwater, and it was absolutely gorgeous. It was one of my earlier festivals too, and I did every year, and it's sadly gone now. But that one, we need more of that, more steampunk, more pagan festivals, more of that, where people can be free to explore and create, right? I find the medieval and Renaissance stuff gets so sort of cut into the same area, and it's so Eurocentric. It hones in on that one spot, and it just wants to stay there.
Right. I know they used to have one in Milton, but it disappeared quite a few years ago now.
Yeah. So that one became part of the Pirate Fest outside of Guelph.
Oh, okay.
So when it went under, and I think it was Fairy Fest in Guelph went under, there were people from both of them that weren't ready to let it go yet. So now they have the new Pirate Fest that's at Marden Park, just outside of Guelph.
Okay. And so I'm kind of jumping around here, so forgive me, but I'm going to go back to runes.
Yep.
I'm going to go back to the runes. So what kind of materials do you use to craft runes?
Again, typically steel, but I think that's more of a cost thing, because I've made a couple copper sets and a couple bronze and a couple brass sets of runes, but the pure mass value of steel versus any of those other metals is ridiculous. So I've priced out more copper sets than I've made, hands down, because just the material cost is outrageous, and I can't compete with that. But the steel ones are nice. They clink and they work, and it's in my element, right? I always feel delicate when I'm working with the copper and other stuff. And bronze scares the crap out of me too. Bronze is it's ornery. So you got to kind of work with it, right? So even a bronze rune set, I'm like, oh, so.
Okay. And so is there a lot of call for handmade runes, or handmade runes, I guess, or do people just kind of tend to go out and buy them? Because you can go into a lot of the metaphysical shops and get them. Yeah.
Or you can go on Amazon and, get a set of amethyst ones for a couple pennies that were made by, wage slaves in a factory somewhere. It's all in what you want your ritual tool made out of and who you want it made by, I guess. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be a huge demand for it or anything, but there are, the odd time I get someone who reaches out, and I read runes at a couple different places too. And I'm always amazed the people that I meet, when I'm reading, they're like, I didn't realize anyone did this, you know, like, how do you do this? How do you get into this? How do you learn this? Right. So it's fun to explore and share that too.
Okay. So enlighten us. How do you learn about it? How do you get into it?
Do I pitch for my book or no?
You can.
Okay. I wrote a book. I've got two now. I've got, what is it called? A Journey into the Elder Futhark is my first one. And it's like a guided journal into the Elder Futhark runes. Just really, really simple, bare bones stuff. I tried to strip it all down to kind of the history, like the factual history that I could get, the things that I could confirm and know, not the stuff that was created in the 1600s, not the stuff that was created in the 1960s, the actual factual language. So the downside of that is a lot of it is written by the Romans, because they were the ones who were writing the history at the time. They were constantly oppressing them, right? So we've got some skewed views on it, but at least we know their sound values, you know, like we understand the letters, we understand the sound values, we understand the names. And then from there, that's where you start tacking on your own stuff, right? Like if we know Esau's is ice, and that's not really something that you can dispute, well, that's a perfect starting block. Right? But what ice means to me is going to be different than what ice means to you, is going to be different than ice to the next person, right? So we can all kind of explore and think about our own relations with it. So anyway, that talks through that. And then the other one is about kind of further exploring. It's called Further Utilizing the Runes. And it's about looking deeper into any Futhark, like any set of runes or the Ogham or anything like that. If you just want to, it's like mind games and stuff that you can basically play with them to brute force yourself into just like learning and having more exposure, more time, right? It's a language, so it's immersion, right? The more you play with it, the more you're going to be comfortable with it.
Okay, and is there a lot of symbolism that goes along with that too, or is it very sort of exact, sort of like, you know, I mean, you know, the Greco-Roman alphabet is A, B, C, D, and you know, A is for apple, you know. Yeah. But is there a certain amount of symbolism that goes along with the runes?
Yeah. So the Greco-Roman ones is a great example. Like the Romans controlled everything, right? Like they assimilated all these different tribes, and they were like, okay, now this is your language. This is your alphabet, right? Everything was very cut and dry. So it makes it much easier to study that history and see it all, right? So what we can tell with the Elder Futhark is their sound values, but then depending on the region you go to, they might be like inverted, they be backwards or upside down, right? In some regions, they're written left to right. In other regions, it's written right to left. In some places, there are tablets that are bistrophodon, where the writing is actually snaking back and forth down the piece, right? So it seems like there was a rough set of guidelines with the runes as far as like, here are your sound values. But then when it came to how you scratch that in, it was a little bit more, you know, there was a little bit more room for interpretation and play. The big rule with the Elder Futhark is there's no horizontal slashes. A lot of the early script was done in a branch and
I'm gonna have to interrupt you. Sorry, Ryan. That's okay. That's okay. You're very passionate about it, and it's great. But we do have to wrap up. And so I want to extend a great big huge thank you. You've certainly given us a lot to think about, and be sure we're going to have you back.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you so much for tuning in to The Next Element. Until next time, love and light. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
The unsolved ones, we have to send